Have you ever met a pinball champion who could podcast and create a magazine where there just was not one before? Well, today you're in for a real treat. I get to talk with Kathy Barron, the founder of Women Who Podcast magazine and Women Who Sarcast podcast. So this is going to be a really great conversation. We go deep, we come back up for air, and we dive down deep again. Enjoy. Hey, I'm Hillary Baggett, host of Hill Talks Momentum in Midlife. As an occupational therapist turned entrepreneur after 50, I am on a mission to connect, motivate, and inspire women over 40 to know that no matter what is going on in your body, mind, spirit, or business, you can reach for that dream and know you are not alone as we create the Women's Midlife Network. If you've been following along with us, we are doing a whole series on women supporting women. And we are getting into month 2 of this series. And I've just met so many amazing women already, and I know there are more to come. So in case you've missed any of the episodes, head on back in the archives, start around episode probably 72, and you'll meet some of them. And this time, you're going to get to meet Kathy Barron. And here's what we're talking about today. How can someone grow more confident in podcasting or writing for Women Who Podcast magazine? And then she's going to tell you exactly how you could write for them in case you were interested. We talk a little bit about, is monetization something that's accessible, a reality, even possible? We also address the reality of pod fade, when you just lose steam. And we know there's information overload out there, and we just need to do our best, listen to our bodies, take breaks as needed, and have some fun in life. And I'm so excited to welcome Kathy Barron, Women Who Podcast magazine. How are you?
It's great to be here. And thanks for this opportunity to chat with you.
Well, it was a natural fit. As soon as I decided to do a Women Supporting Women series, and specifically because you are Women Who Podcast magazine, it can reach out to people who want to either write for the magazine or want to develop their podcast skills. So that's what we're going to keep on going with today.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
Good. Well, I appreciate you so much. And I'd like to start with the moment that led to you starting Women Who Podcast magazine.
Well, it kind of started many months before, and it was at the Podfest Expo conference, March 2020, right before the world came to an end, just about. And there was a magazine going around, a podcast magazine, and I was really hopeful that it would showcase and feature independent women podcasters. And so I kind of kept an eye on it for a few months and just realized that it wasn't really what I had hoped, because there were a lot of celebrities on the cover, and the format and the layout was there was just a lot inside the magazine. So it was really difficult to read. And so I decided that, I felt that it was important for women independent podcasters to be showcased and featured and brought to the forefront. And, I get these creative ideas in my mind that just pop up, and they're a little intense sometimes, and sometimes I can avoid them and sometimes I can't. And this was one of those where it's like, okay, well, you're going to have to create a magazine yourself. And it was like, I've never published a magazine before. I had no real idea how to go about it. I went to art school for video production, so I'm familiar with like the InDesign and the Illustrator and Photoshop programs a little bit, but nothing extensive. So I had somewhat of an idea of how to start, but I needed some advice, and I needed to kind of bounce this off of someone that I knew had already experienced this, and Sandy Larry's of the Good Girl Confessional podcast. And she created Women Beyond 40. She has like this empire of hers in Australia. And so she started a magazine the December before called Women Beyond 40. I believe it's digital and print. And she has a website, and, you know, she's making some great moves for women in business and all aspects of their lives. And so we met via Zoom, and, you know, I kind of told her my idea, and she's like, you know, Kathy, you need to do this. So she kind of threw me over the cliff, and it's been quite an experience ever since. So that was end of 2020. And then the first issue was April 2021.
Yeah.
And it's kind of evolved with each issue as far as the number featured, the different segments, the articles. You know, I want the magazine to be a way for podcasters to collaborate and connect, but also listeners to discover new podcasts. You know, it's great to get word of mouth from friends and family about podcasts that they listen to, but to be able to read about the podcasts, you know, you don't really get that by just listening to their episodes. You know, when we feature podcasters, we do an extensive interview with them, and we write about not just their podcast, but who they are as people. And it's really cool to read about the behind the scenes, you know, the background of each podcaster.
That's my favorite stuff. I remember back with Behind the Music and those stories when it was like MTV and VH1 and learning how like a music artist created the song. So I love how they made this or their backstories. So I'm so glad you like to showcase the skills and gifts and unique voices, literally unique voices of podcasters. And I know that accessibility is so important to you, making sure that if someone wants to learn how to podcast, am I remembering that correctly? That they could come to you and you have kind of an informal.
I mean, as far as the articles and the magazine issues, it's definitely educational tools. We have a monthly learning community that is for featured podcasters only at the moment. I haven't opened that up to everyone yet because I still want it to be a casual, kind of comfortable setting. And I also want people to engage and participate. And I feel that if it gets too large too fast, then, you know, I want it to be kind of like fireside chats sort of, you know, environment. And so currently it's just for featured podcasters. So if there's a podcaster out there that wants to get featured, they can certainly go to our website, complete the form. And we just require that you have podcasts for at least a year.
Okay.
Because we feel that first year is really the hardest one. And if you can make it through the first year, then you'll have lots of stories to tell us, and we can definitely create an article from those experiences.
Well, that sounds great. And I don't think I realized that once I'd gotten featured that I could qualify to attend those monthly meetings. So I need to add myself to the list.
Absolutely.
I would love to meet other women podcasters. And especially what's really golden for me is like, oh yeah, it's not a big group. I'm like, oh yes, introverts unite. Because a lot of people who podcast are much more introverted than anyone would think that we are.
Exactly.
Right?
And I think the learning community is really cool because we do have the same people that come to the monthly meetings. And so you get to know each other beyond that space. You know, we also have a community through Mighty Networks where you can see videos of our symposium that we had in 2022, but also we have workshops in the learning community. And so those are recorded and archived in the Mighty Networks community. So there's a space where we meet once a month, but there's also a space where you can collaborate and talk with other podcasters daily on the Mighty Networks community.
Nice. how did I miss this last year? Oh my goodness.
A lot's happening. A lot's happening.
Yeah, that's exciting for sure. And I'm going to kind of circle back a little bit, even though that phrase got way overused for a while.
Yeah.
So someone can write for you, and you have a very kind of specific writing style guide, and they could reach out to you. And we'll talk about that kind of at the end. But I just wanted to kind of plant that seed. If you've been podcasting, if you're a woman for more than a year, you've been podcasting, then you could actually write an article, get featured, and it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah, I mean, they're kind of two separate things. I usually don't like to feature the podcasters that actually write as well. It's just kind of a weird thing for me. So you can write and not be featured, and you can be featured and not write. So you don't necessarily have to be a podcaster to write. If you're a writer that knows about podcasting or just writing about anything really, I mean, because we try to get down to the basics as far as like stress and decision fatigue and, stuff that we're kind of dealing with in our daily lives that may or may not affect our podcasting.
Yeah, absolutely. Which
it's
actually
all interconnected. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Sorry about that. Yes, I totally agree. And I think it means I was not actually a featured podcaster. I think I was just a writer. So I'm so glad you distinguished that. So that's important, that you don't have to do both, and you don't have to. There's just a lot of freedom. Is that correct?
To be featured, there's no cost to be featured. There's no fee to be featured. And, I think that's part of, the magazine and the learning community, is just have it as low barrier as possible. Because I think that's another thing that women podcasters come up against, is the amount of money it may or may not cost to be part of a group or to learn new tools or whatever. So in our future, our vision of Women Who Podcast magazine is to create scholarships and mentorships, so that, if you do get a scholarship, you also have a mentor to get you up and running. And for a year, this mentor works with you to make sure that you succeed through that first year. Because like I said, that's hard, because once you get going with podcast episodes, it's a lot of work. And I don't think many of us realized when we first started how much work it does take to release an episode.
Absolutely. And if you have perfectionism on top of it, which before we pressed record, you and I were talking about, that's something we have in common. And I think it is a challenge for those of us of like, how good is good enough? Now, we know that sound quality is essential. If you don't have a good microphone and a quiet enough space, people just aren't going to listen because it's quite unpleasant. And our ears are far less tolerant than our eyes, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, speaking of women who podcast and growing more confident, how would you say is a good way, other than reaching out to you all, writing for you, and considering, if they got invited and featured to join that monthly membership, how can a woman grow more confident in podcasting?
I think it's learning from others. I think it's important to learn from others' mistakes. And I think also realizing your limits and what you're comfortable with and what you're not comfortable with. So I think when you first start out, there's no reason to go big necessarily when you first start. It's always good to do baby steps. You don't need the most expensive microphone or the most expensive headphones, because that's just a distraction from the content. I mean, those are tools you need, but the content is really what you need to focus on. And just really focus on your why and why you want a podcast. And, just be true to yourself and be as authentic as you can. And I think the vulnerability comes as you do podcasting. I don't think that's something that you have to start with, because it's a hard thing to do, to be vulnerable. And just know that imposter syndrome, pod fade, all of that is a normal process of podcasting. And it's a cyclical thing. I've been doing podcasting for 5 years, and there are definitely cycles of pod fade. What am I doing with my life? What am I doing with this podcast? And imposter syndrome. So it's a normal evolution.
Now, that term you used, pod fade, can you explain that just a little bit? Because it's different from imposter syndrome, right?
Yeah, pod fade is where you kind of hit a wall with your podcast and you're exhausted, you're burnt out, you're not sure if you want to continue. And basically, pod fade you may just need a break. You may just have to take a month off and just take care of yourself. And that's something that every podcaster goes through. And if they say they never have, then they're lying, because at some point you do get burnt out and you do need to recharge and figure out which way you want to go with your podcast. And like I said, it's a normal process for your podcast to evolve and change and pivot. And I mean, that's a normal thing, and it's okay to do that. Imposter syndrome is, it hits every aspect, whether it's a career, relationship, podcasting. And it's basically, you ask your questions, I don't know what I'm doing. I have no right to talk about this topic. I have, it's like the fake it till you make it thing. So imposter syndrome is also a normal thing that everybody experiences, regardless of what career you're in, industry. It's something, it's basically doubting yourself that you're not qualified or you're not the expert or.
Absolutely. And I've just started my 4th season of podcasting, and each season I've decided when that season starts, because it's usually when I've hit some kind of wall. I didn't know the term pod fade. And I think giving ourselves permission as we're growing, as we're evolving, as we're kind of honing the craft and maybe shifting perspectives, maybe wanting to pivot a bit. I mean, the whole reason I'm doing Women Supporting Women for season 4 is just to make sure that women know that there's so many of us out there who are just cheering you on and encouraging you no matter what you're doing or how you're serving and showing up in life.
Yeah, I think it's key to, when you start a podcast, to have your little tribe, your little support group that you can go to in case you start questioning yourself, or you have trouble doing a particular thing, or you're just not sure. I think it's good to have supportive women who are already podcasting to kind of be like, yeah, I went through that same thing, because 100%, I'm sure people have gone through the same thing that you're feeling. So it's important to have people to encourage you and inspire you to, keep going, because it's not easy. I think a lot of podcasters feel like they're on an island by themselves. I mean, I know I felt that, especially if you don't have a co-host. So it's hard to do it by yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. Solo casting is hard. I mean, even if you're interviewing someone, you're still in either your booth or your kitchen or your office or living room or closet, just trying to take those steps. Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking some of the mistakes I made, and I'll ask you about your mistakes, but I didn't want to just put you on the spot. So I would say my first mistake was perfectionism. And I did 27 takes of my first trailer for the podcast, and it was less than 3 minutes. And I was obsessing and I was in my head. And if anyone listening out there is thinking, okay, I want to start a podcast, I want to start a broadcast. Well, you know what? No one is listening to you right now. If you haven't put anything out there, no one is listening, and they won't and can't until you put it out there. And my second mistake was I thought out of the gate, well, I need to do this every week. And I am planning and interviewing and writing scripts and editing and uploading. And I reached pod fade burnout pretty quickly, and had to pivot over to like, oh, wait a minute. Who said I had to do this every week? Some podcasts come out more than once a week, some every 2 weeks, some once a month. So set yourself up for success, maybe I would say.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure. Like if you Google how to start a podcast, there's like all of these rules and you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to post it on this day, this is the better day, this is the worst day. It's like there is so much information out there and it's great to have that information, but you have to take it all with a grain of salt and fit it to what your life is going to be able to do. I mean, because if you have like 2 jobs and 3 kids and you're married and it's just realistically, it's not going to happen that way.
Yeah.
So, you need to do it and you can always increase the number of episodes and you can always decrease them. There's no real right way to do it. I know that podcasters, some do it on their phone and it's perfectly fine. So, you need to do what works best for you and forget everything else.
Absolutely. And I would say, as a woman over 50, which I am, then that's what we need to do. I mean, women out there, do what's best for you in every aspect of your life.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be a podcaster to get something out of this conversation, even, but there is so much information overload and best practices and what the experts say. It's like, oh my goodness, just start. If you can do something consistently, once a month, by the end of the year, you will have 12 podcasts that are completely done. Yes. If you start out of the gate like a racehorse, like me, like, oh, I'm going to do it every week. 6 months in, I was like,
it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot.
For sure. Well, I want to pause just a minute on podcasting just to do a little bit of fun fact stuff. And I got to ask you before, I'm really excited actually about both of these. And when we talk about being a woman over 40, a woman over 50, and we want to talk about how do we encourage people and show up as vulnerable. So I'm going to ask you the question that was not your first choice for me to ask. I want to hear about you committing to do that. Is it an AIDS race or AIDS ride? What do you call it?
It's an AIDS ride. Back in the day, this was in 94. So I was young and spry back then. It was basically a fundraising event from San Francisco to LA. It's a bike ride. And you're supposed to train before, but when you're not a cyclist, and you don't really know what to do, it's training is difficult. But there are, people that did the ride from all different shapes, sizes, cultures, backgrounds. There was this one guy that was actually a pro cyclist and, he did every day like in 3 hours. So, it's hard to compare yourself to someone like that. And I was on a mountain bike that had the skinny tires. So it's a little heavier bike. It's not a road bike. So, it's what I had to work with, but I did raise like $4,600. So that's the silver lining. And I met some great people. It was a great experience. Unfortunately, I don't think I passed after the second day, third day, because I got sagged. I was overly hydrated. I probably needed to go to the hospital, but because I was getting IVs and all that other stuff. So it was a pretty tricky situation. But these were like 80, 100-mile days pretty much every day.
Oh my goodness.
So it was not something that I was set up for, because I certainly wasn't biking even 20 miles a day when I was training.
Okay.
So yeah, it was a bit tricky for me, but it was a great experience. I met some amazing people and some I still keep in touch with, and it was for a great cause. So
absolutely. And I think our listeners need to hear that it's okay to try for something. It's okay to reach for a goal. And it's okay if you are not riding your bike across the finish line, but you're walking across the finish line. It's at least setting the intention and doing something, at least trying, because then you've supported, $4,600. That's amazing. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do a day of 80 to 100 miles. So I say, well done, Kathy, for giving it a try and for being imperfect and for sharing that with us.
Thanks. Yeah, it was definitely a learning experience. I learned a lot about myself, and I was able to ride in at the end in LA. There's like the staging area where all the bikers stay for like, it was a long time. It was like 3 or 4 hours, too long. And then we all like ride in together, crossing the finish line in LA with a bunch of spectators. And so that was an overwhelming experience and very humbling to get cheered on, because it's a huge feat for a lot of people. So
Absolutely.
and they're still doing it. It's under a different name, I believe. But they still do it every year.
And how many days is it supposed to be?
I think it's like a 7-day ride.
Oh my
Yeah. So
goodness.
it's a week ride from San Francisco to LA. Yeah.
Huge
it's a lot.
kudos to you for even trying. I'll give you the virtual high five for people that catch us over on YouTube. Oh my goodness. I'm really impressed, and I'm kind of sweaty thinking about that of like, oh, that would be so hard. I'm like,
yeah.
Oh goodness. Well, then I'll pivot to the more fun question. Your second fun fact, which was a lot lighter, but Kathy and I share something in common that we really enjoy playing in video games and arcades, and you have a championship to tell me about.
So there's a local pinball machine or pinball museum, I should say, that has pinball machines from like the 30s and 40s and some really cool things. And so they have this league for men and women. And then at the end of the league, they have a man and woman, a male and female champion. So they don't just do one for the whole group. So many years ago, probably like 5 or 6 years ago now, I won the women's league. So that was fun.
Super fun.
And I actually beat one guy, was like top 10 of the world or something in pinball. So he was having a bad day. That day I competed against him. So,
wow.
Can't always be on your A game, but it's fun. It was just a bunch of us getting together to have fun playing pinball, and it's pretty competitive, but we're all very friendly. So
I love it. And I mean, that's a good reminder too. When we're supporting other women, we need to remind each other, hey, are you doing something that's fun for you? Because, pod fade is kind of like a midlife fade. Sometimes we just find this, we're hitting this wall, or we're exhausted, or we're not excited and enjoying something. So get out there and have some fun, people. I just played a game of, what did I do? Burger Time this morning. I have my own arcade game downstairs with 60
nice.
games on it. And so I take a break. It gets me moving up and down the stairs, let the dog out. So it's important just to have some fun.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh my goodness, that was super fun. Well, I was going to ask about monetization, which I have not achieved in Hill Talk's Momentum in Midlife podcast. But sometimes I think, well, gosh, that would be nice to spend all this time every week investing in creating something that hopefully is serving women. But what's your opinion on monetization?
I think there's too much focus on monetization with independent podcasters. I mean, sure, we would love to make money off of this, but the reality of it is that we won't. If you start a Patreon, that may cover your overhead as far as your hosting costs, your editing, that might get you even with your expenses. But as far as like doing it full time, making it your day job, it's very difficult to do. And, a lot of sponsors, a lot of advertisers, they want 1 million downloads before they're even going to talk to you about it.
Right.
So, I think the things that we do have control over is starting a Patreon, and it doesn't have to be a huge deal. You can just do some behind the scenes clips or some extra audio that's already being recorded. So it's repurposing, stuff that you already have going, and just have the levels be like $1 or $3 or $5. Maybe spend some money on stickers or, pins or something, just to kind of get some marketing out there. I did Patreon with my podcast for a little while, and I was getting maybe $65 a month, which is not a bad deal. It paid for expenses for the podcast. And it was mainly friends and family that wanted to support me. So, they didn't necessarily want the rewards, but they just wanted to support me. And I think it's an opportunity for your friends and family to support you in a way that they can do it. I think people are hesitant to receive support monetarily unless they give something back. But I mean, that's one way to do it. Another way is fiscal sponsorship, which is something that I don't think a lot of podcasters know about. And in some ways, it may not pertain or have anything to do with their podcast. But a fiscal sponsorship is you basically latch on to another nonprofit's 501(c)(3).
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So if say your podcast is about sustainability or the environment, then you can look up a nonprofit that has similar likes and topics, and then you can approach them. So then you can apply for grants.
Huh.
And then through their nonprofit, they get a certain percentage of the grant money that you receive, but you're still able to apply for grants if it applies to your podcast.
Well, I just learned like 10 new things, and I'm furiously taking notes over here. So if anyone watches on YouTube and they wonder, what is she looking at? I'm a note taker for sure. And because I don't have a great working memory. So it's always important that I get it in writing. Well, oh my goodness. This was so much fun getting to hear more about Women Who Podcast magazine. And you've got this huge heart. Like, I know you like to pretend that you're really tough. And
Yeah.
your Women Who Sarcast podcast, which is your other podcast. But I can see your heart. That's one of my gifts, is seeing like into the heart of a person. And you give so much, and you're so generous with your time, with your talents, and just supporting other women. So, Kathy Barron, Women Who Podcast magazine, how can people get in touch with you?
Well, there's always Instagram at Women Who Podcast Magazine. There's our website, womenwhopodcastmag.com, and you can contact us through the website. You can fill out the Get Featured form on the website. You can sign up for our newsletter. It's a twice monthly newsletter. I'm not going to barrage you with emails every other day. And if you do sign up, you get a complimentary copy of the first anniversary issue of the magazine, just to kind of dip your toes into what it looks like and what the vibe is. So yeah, I mean, I'm available. So, and if you need any support, we're always here to help others. So
fantastic. Well, I'll definitely pop the website and IG and information in the show notes. And oops, I just lost that thought. There was going to be one there. It was beyond gratitude. It was something else. Oh, what can people expect to find in the magazine? Because I think people don't realize, because it's all digital, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And how many people are either writing articles or featured in an issue?
So each issue is roughly between 7 and 8 podcasters that are featured. Eventually, I'd like to increase that. But currently, as far as the people that are doing the interviews, the writers, we have a very low staff. I mean, we have a few writers that do the interviews. I'm one of them. And then we have other people like yourself that write topic articles. So, doing the interview is definitely extensive because you have to, meet with the podcaster, interview them, write the article. There's a lot to it. But we have a lot of segments called Ask the Podcaster. We have up and coming segment now for those that are under a year old, just to kind of get them out there as well. It's just a little blurb of their information and a short description of the podcast. We have like tips and tricks. So, we're really trying to make it as a resource for people to go to learn things and to collaborate and to network.
Absolutely. And it's very reasonably priced. I went and tried to buy a magazine off of a newsstand and I almost fell over And so, it's not $10, that's for sure. So I think you've got it priced, at a good point.
Yes, $5.99 an issue, regardless if it's an anniversary issue or a regular issue. The anniversary issues are usually larger. I think the last one was like 108 pages, and the normal issue is like 75 to 80. So, this isn't just a little short Zen that we're selling. So
Good. Well, I wanted to make sure we gave a little details because sometimes people think magazine, and over the years, a lot of magazines have gotten a lot thinner. And so I think it's important to kind of get people jazzed about, hey, Women Who Podcast magazine, subscribe, support them.
Yeah, we have a lot of photos. We try to make it somewhat entertaining, not just all words.
That's right, which I really appreciate for sure. Well, Kathy Barron, once again, thanks so much for joining me today and supporting other women.
Thanks, Hillary. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, here's where I need your help. I want you to help me let women entrepreneurs and business owners who are over 50 know that there is a place where they can come to connect, learn, and get inspired at the Women's Midlife Network. You can share this episode with them today. Whether you're clicking those 3 dots to share the episode or following that little box with the arrow up. Thanks so much. Well, here's my takeaways. It is okay to take a break, whether it is a vacation, a hiatus, or a sabbatical, if you are podcasting or writing or working for yourself. Taking time off to restore, refresh, and renew yourself is going to help you come back with a better frame of mind. Can you imagine if you just got to ask the podcaster a question? There are so many great opportunities to meet with other women who also podcast and who are maybe even looking for guests. I loved hearing about her having to stop in the AIDS race and getting to actually still cross the finish line. And I had to correct myself because I thought she walked her bike across, but she got to recover from her dehydration and then she got to ride across. Total victory. So I love that we can talk to other women, that we can learn from each other, that we can truly reach out and be authentic. We don't have to be perfect. So let's just keep giving ourselves permission, release that perfection, and move on. Who are you going to be reaching out to lift up next? Let me know. Thanks so much for listening. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you being an essential part of the Women's Midlife Network. We're connecting women. We're sharing stories and inspiring change. And not just for now, but for decades to come. I am so thankful for you, and I always hope you feel the love. Until next time, this is Hillary Baggett with Hill Talks Podcast. Let's move forward in midlife.